Dear students, today we shall be dealing with distribution of plankton, that how plankton are distributed and what are the factors which influence the distribution of the plankton. Before proceeding, it is my request to you all to like and subscribe my channel. When we talk about the distribution of the plankton, and we say that in all natural waters, irrespective of latitude, longitude, and physiochemical characters, majority of normal supporters are plankton, and they differ in great many respects. Occasionally, they occur in certain thermal waters, subterranean waters, spring-fed streams, transient pools, and different kinds of the water bodies. The presence of the plankton in natural waters is itself an indication of the significant position which it occupies in the aquatic environment. And it has been claimed by some of the oceanographers that the polar seas support abundant plankton than do the tropical ones. Now, what does it mean? It means that the polar seas, they support the abundant plankton than do the tropical ones. It means the diversity or the abundance of the plankton in the polar waters is more than that of the tropical waters. And the polar and the tropical inland water are still little known. And when we talk limnologically, their data is still scarce when compared to other. Certain north low-lying lakes in the countries bordering on Baltic Sea, this is the Baltic Sea, plankton production in inland water of North America is also little known. First of all, we shall be talking about the horizontal distribution of plankton. There is irregularity in horizontal distribution of plankton in water. And one of the most causes of irregularity is wind, which acts upon the surface waters. Plankton drift due to wind action are always temporary and is common in many inland waters. This drifting leads to the meeting toward the shore becoming so thick that the whole water color is altered and changes the general appearance. The general effect of the drift is to concentrate more or less upper waters throughout one part of the water body with corresponding thinning on the opposite side. So it means that when we say that wind is one of the important influencers which influence the distribution of the plankton horizontally, and when the wind blows toward the shore, they take up all the plankton toward the shore and thus making the distribution irregular, thin on one hand and thick on the opposite side. So many times shores are having so much plankton that there are the and if they are mostly the algae, then there is algal bloom and thus form a thick mat along the shoreline. The other important factors which are responsible for the distribution of the plankton, and they are inflowing streams. If we talk about the streams, they are inflowing streams. Irregularity of the shoreline, that is also an important factor. Depth of the water, flowage areas, water current, they are some of the important factors which influence the distribution of the plankton horizontally. And wind is one of the most common causes of irregularity in horizontal distribution of the plankton. Since wind causes waves, but in addition may produce an actual drift of the upper waters. And when we talk about the vertical distribution of the plankton, it is a complicated matter. In deeper region, so what does it mean? When we talk about the distribution of the plankton, along these lines, We call it as the horizontal distribution. Along these lines, we call it horizontal distribution. And when we talk about a water body in terms of the surface toward the depth or depth toward the surface, it is vertical. So, in deeper region, plankton may show little or no resemblance to that of the upper waters. In lakes, a uniform vertical distribution of the plankton occurs only during the spring and the fall hour turns. But certain plankton are distributed in minimal quantities from surface to the lowermost limits of the habitability in the range of concentration that they occur. So, when we talk about the vertical distribution, it mostly occurs during the spring and the fall hour turns. If you are aware, if you are aware of the fact of the thermal stratification, that there are the strata in a water body, there are the strata which many a time there is hour turn. We call it as the spring hour turn and the autumn hour turn, wherein water from the upper side goes to the down and the down comes toward the upper. And similarly, this kind of mixing occurs twice in two seasons, that is spring and the autumn. We call it as the fall. So that takes along with it the planktons present on the surface toward the deeper waters and from the deeper or the column toward the surface. First of all, we shall be talking about the distribution of the phytoplankton. So when we consider the general mass distribution, or before when we talk about the distribution of the phytoplankton, the uppermost waters, they are home of the chlorophyll bearing plankton, and perhaps the light plays an important role and indicates the distribution of the phytoplankton. So as the students of the science, we know that the phytoplanktons, they are distributed mostly on the surface water, because they want the light to produce, to transduce, or to convert the electromagnetic waves or the light waves into the chemical energy, or light energy into the chemical energy. So considering the general mass distribution, there are few stalemates that are commonly taken, such as if we talk about the blue-green algae, that is Myxophyceae, we also call them as the cyanobacteria, or the and other chlorophyceae, the concentration is maximum than that of the diatoms. That when we talk about the blue-green and the green phytoplankton, concentration is maximum than that of the diatoms, and this has been thought to be due to the heavier weight. And maximum population of the chlorophyll bearing phytoplankton are at some level below the surface of the waters, just below the surface of the water. They are concentrated just below the surface of the water, whereas the blue-green algae as a group tend to concentrate toward the surface. So there are certain phytoplanktons which are mostly chlorophyll bearing. They just occupy, they are distributed mostly just below the surface of the waters, whereas blue-green algae, they occupy, or they just concentrate toward the surface. So when we talk about the zooplankton, the distribution behavior, they may be very different in different kinds of the waters. Under conditions of the well-developed physicochemical stratification, the levels of maximum population of the crustacea and rotifera often correspond closely, although such a statement cannot be dependent upon. So it is difficult to generalize that on the vertical distribution of the zooplankton as a whole, and the same is true of various taxonomic groups composing the zooplankton. So certain tendencies in the vertical distribution appear, such as greater occurrence of the sarcodina in the lower waters. It means sarcodina, they occupy the lower waters. The dinoflagellata, they prefer the upper water, and general scattering of the ciliate, and the ciliates are generally scattered, and the selection of the different levels by the young and adult stages of the certain crustacean. So the crustacea, they occupy different levels based on the stage, based on the stage in which they are. For example, mysis, plankton stage, or the mysis 1, mysis 2, mysis 3, mysis 4 are adult. So they have the different distribution pattern. So now, let us talk a little bit about what are the conditions which influence the distribution of the plankton, vertical distribution of the plankton. Now, among the influences which may operate in the production of various forms of the vertical distribution, there are certain important parameters such as light, food, dissolved gases, temperature, wind, gravity, and age of the individuals which play an important role in the vertical distribution of the organisms. So we shall be talking one by one in a very brief manner. The first of all, light. So first of all, we shall be talking about the light. That light is one of the most important factor in vertical distribution of the plankton, and it is well established that its presence for the various reasons tends to the removal or sometime disappearance of the plankton. So it is the light has a major influence on the plankton, and it has a greater influence in terms of the presence or the absence of the plankton. The annual and the diurnal variation of the light, whether we talk about the qualitative, whether we talk about the quantitative variation, they have the influence on the migration of the plankton. Now, differences arise in light reaction of the young and the adult stages of the certain planktons, which lead to different vertical distribution of the life history stages in the same species. So, light is one of the important factors which play an important role in the distribution of the plankton on vertical basis. And secondly, we shall be talking about the food. The abundance and availability of the zooplankton also depends to some extent by the distribution of the food. So it means that the food availability has a role in the abundance or the distribution of the plankton, and it has been well established that the concentration of the protozoa, microcrustacea, and rotifers have been correlated with the presence of settling suspended materials. So it means that wherever suspended settling materials are present, it means that the protozoa, microcrustacea, and rotifera have been found at such places. Thirdly, we do have the dissolved gases. Do dissolved gases have an impact on the distribution of the plankton? Yes, dissolved oxygen is an important part in rendering the deeper waters partially or wholly uninhabitable for most of the common zooplanktons. So some zooplanktons are most sensitive than others to the accumulating results of the decomposition in underlying waters, so that all which not retreat upward at the same rate and certain stratification may result. So it means when we talk about a water body, we know that most of the dead and decaying organic matter that settles to the bottom, and there is a greater demand of the oxygen. So it means whatever oxygen is present at the bottom or in a water body, that is utilized for the breakdown or the decomposition of the organic matter. So it means that if there is a greater amount of the utilization of the dissolved oxygen in the bottom, it leads to the decrease of the oxygen quantity in water as well, that can prove lethal. So many times the zooplankton, they are not fast enough to come toward the surface, but they succumb to the lesser dissolved oxygen and they die. So the point is that the dissolved oxygen has an influence on the distribution of the plankton. So, and next we will be talking about the temperature. Temperature also plays an important role, and it has both direct as well as the indirect effect. So when we talk about the effect in terms of the temperature, it is the direct effect involves the selection by the motile planktons of favorable. So it means many times the plankton are they are influenced by the temperature, and its direct effect is that they move towards or away from the higher or the lower water temperature. And secondly, it is inability of the non-motile forms to exist in the levels having the certain temperatures. And many times you will not find if the planktons are totally non-motile, you will not find those very organisms in certain temperatures which are unfavorable. And among the indirect effect, the changes in the density and viscosity of the water, altering the flotation levels of those planktons which are adjusted to the flotation. So indirect effect involves the changes in the density and the viscosity of the water, which is altered because of the temperature, and the planktons which are adjusted to the flotation. And fifth important point is the wind. Wind influences the distribution of the plankton, and the effect of the wind is significant with the season. So season marks an important you can say effect on the plankton. And during summer, direct influence they directly influence the apilimnion, and during hard blows vertical distribution of the plankton is seen. So during autumn and the spring overturns, wind disturbs the plankton because of same density and viscosity throughout. But during the period of ice cover, the disturbing influence of the wind is eliminated. So it means that the wind which marks an influence on the distribution of the plankton during the cover of the ice, that has that does not cannot play an important role in the distribution because of the ice cover. And sixth important point is gravity. So gravity is also one of the important factors which influence the distribution of the plankton. Reduction of the specific gravity makes certain phytoplankton such as gliotrichia, this is the gliotrichia, uh, to congregate at the surface waters. So many times it is because of the reduction of the specific gravity, it makes certain phytoplankton such as gliotrichia to congregate at the surface waters. And the plankton, especially the pelagic crustacean, they are heavier than water and sink with appreciable speed when inactive. And if those very organisms are heavier than that of the water, and they sink toward the bottom at an appreciable speed, and when they are inactive, so definitely maintain their position in water because this very organism is almost active to maintain its position in the water. And the age of the individual of a species, age also plays an important role, that whether they are younger or whether they are adults. So as a general rule, young individuals occur near the surface, adults tend to sink into the deeper waters. So this is one important point, that the age matters, and they also have an impact on the distribution of the plankton. And as a general rule, young individuals occur near the surface, whereas the adults tend to sink into the deeper waters. So this was a brief and the precise, or you can say the summary of the distribution of the plankton in water. So this was all about the distribution. So Thank you very much. We shall be next talking about the cyclomorphosis, that is the change in the morphological shape of the planktons. Thank you very much.